How can we take down larger than life heroes without a violent struggle or a rebellion? Let's think about this in today's episode of the StoryPod podcast. Come on in, bestie. Welcome to StoryPod, where we do the doing of story development together. Brought to you by Creative BFF. Hello, friend. Listen, welcome back to the podcast. Happy Friday. I'm so happy to be with you today. I hope that you have had a very pleasant and productive week. If not, listen, there's always next week. My name is Ashley. I am your creative BFF, and at this location, this StoryPod podcast, we work out story things. Okay. Woo, my brain is like apparently not working. Basically, we work our storytelling muscles in various ways. Today, we will be doing one of my favorite things to do, which is to answer a storytelling question. I was torn between two possible videos today, and this one won out for today, but the other one is coming, continuing our not ChatGPT specifically, our AI game making test that is coming back, because I have been doing more testing. But for today, we are going to answer a question from Reddit. If you have any questions for me, if you would like to reach out to me for any reason regarding your story, please feel free to do so. There are several links below which will allow you to do that. So let's go ahead and get right into the question. Before I redo the question, I want to invite you to also add your thoughts on this question. I read it and I was like, let's just launch in. Let's just try it. I have a loose kind of concept that I want to work out here with you live-ish on today's episode, but feel free to throw your thoughts in the comment. I am not saying that my idea is going to be perfect, but we can all figure it out together. Your idea will possibly be better. Okay. And listen, bring it in because we're all trying to learn together. So let's go ahead and read this question. It is from the r/fantasy writers subreddit by Titus Groan. And they say, struggling to find an original central conflict for a fantasy that critiques epic heroes as cultural myths, fantasy satire. Hi everyone, I'm working on a fantasy novel concept and I've hit a wall with the central conflict, so I'm hoping for outside perspectives. The core idea is kind of The Boys, but for fantasy and epic hero narratives instead of superheroes. In this world, a small group of legendary figures exist who clearly embody familiar pop fantasy archetypes. The chosen one, the magical prodigy, the grim monster hunter, the cozy, self-care focused adventurer, the political schemer, the RPG-style healer, etc. They are not tyrants or rulers. They don't actively oppress anyone. Instead, their stories, reputations, and myths dominate the cultural imagination so completely that they shape how people understand heroism, suffering, growth, trauma, relationships, and even what kinds of lives are considered meaningful. The damage they cause is mostly symbolic, indirect, and systemic, not physical. My first instinct was to have the protagonist directly confront these corrupt heroes, exposing them, fighting them, or somehow bringing them down. I also considered versions where the protagonists act as journalists or truth seekers who reveal the hero's hypocrisy. But I've ended up discarding those approaches because they all seem to collapse into a very familiar structure: good people versus bad people, with a clear moral victory at the end. Ironically, that feels too close to the heroic logic I'm trying to critique in the first place. So my problem is, what kind of conflict can drive a story where the antagonists are alive, powerful as myths, but not overt villains, and where the protagonists aren't trying to kill them or overthrow a regime? I'm specifically trying to avoid a simple good versus evil arc, violent rebellion as the main engine, or a story that boils down to exposing secrets solves everything. I'm interested in conflicts that are cultural, narrative, ethical, psychological, or structural. Have you seen stories that handle this well? Or do you have ideas for conflicts that don't rely on physical confrontation or classic investigative plots? Thanks in advance. I'm genuinely stuck and open to rethinking the premise if needed. So the first time I read this question, I was like, girl, I do not even know. But as I looked at it again today, I was thinking like, okay, let's think about how this happens in our own world. Now, I have never watched The Boys. I don't know if that's considered sacrilege. And we can set up the protagonist and antagonist not necessarily in the questioner, the asker is saying, not in the traditional struggle of good against evil, but of just opposing goals, right? So what I was kind of thinking is, if we draw a parallel to maybe what happens in our society now, the way it changes, is it that basically society, culture has started a shift away from these heroes, the myths, the legends, the ways that they are the apotheosis. That's a throwback that nobody's gonna get. Basically the apotheosis. Did I use that correctly? I don't even know. How they become the archetypes of certain concepts, like they said, heroism, suffering, growth, trauma, relationships, those kinds of things. They've become these archetypes of what it means to represent those things. So can we set up a society that is moving on from needing these types of heroes? It may be just, technology, science, or magic, whatever the logic systems exist in this world, in this fantasy world. Perhaps they've moved past the need for these heroes. Perhaps the heroes have done such a good job that there's not world conflict, right? Necessarily. So perhaps these heroes, these heroes, not the heroes of the story, these antagonists, the antagonists of the story, but these mythical, legendary heroes. Perhaps there are some who want to revive their waning popularity, and there may be some that are like content to just slip into what's the word? I always say slip into oblivion, but that's not the word, but slip into what is the term? Like a normal, quiet life. I can't think of the word that I was trying to say. And perhaps some of these, like the Chosen One or whatever, are trying to revive their fame, basically, their cultural importance. And we're in a society that's shifting away. And so what that means for the actual protagonists of the story and what they are doing to help create that shift, perhaps these protagonists are of a new class of, just think about social media today, what fame looks like today. It's more democratized, I guess, today. It looks different to be famous than it did even in the 90s, right? Where you had a very clear separation between regular people and people who were famous, like movie stars, models, people like that, but probably even like political figures and stuff like that. But if we're just looking at the people who become these luminaries in the minds of society, right? In the minds of the generations coming up, of kids and just people, and people wanting to emulate what they see of these people. And even though the asker doesn't necessarily want to do like this exposing of secrets and hypocrisy, that could still be an element of it, because when this particular group of mythical, legendary heroes who maybe did some amazing thing for the world, like saved the world from the last demon dragon invasion, or whatever the history of this particular world is, and that really cemented their fame and the adulation that the world gave them, right? Because they saved the world. But now we've moved on from that. Now it's not necessary, perhaps. And when we look at that as a parallel to what we have going on now, it's like, okay, we do still have quote unquote movie stars. We do still have like those types of celebrities, but that seems to kind of be dying out a little bit, right? Society and culture has kind of moved in a different direction where now you don't have to be in a movie. You don't have to be supported by a big studio or, have a recording contract or anything like that to be famous. If you do the right things on social media, you can be as famous, if not more famous than somebody who's been in a movie. There are video game streamers. I don't want to say video game streamers, but there are streamers who are arguably more rich and more famous than some movie stars out here, right? Even classic movie stars. So moving away from the need for that class in the mindset, in the cultural mind, right? We don't need that celebrity class, or it's easier to become, not easier, but there's more of an open path, a self-made path to becoming that type of celebrity or to becoming famous at all and rich or infamous, right? So can we draw a similar parallel where, whatever distinguished these legendary figures is no longer so rare, perhaps? It's not something that is necessarily valued the way it was before, or at least of the generations coming up. There might still be some who were kids at the time that all this was happening that hold on. We all have our celebrities or whatever that we kind of hold on to, that we remember from childhood and all that kind of stuff. And if they don't come out with a scandal, then it's like, okay, this is something that's still meaningful to me because there was a, core memory or something created around this person, or something that they created, or a movie that they were in, or a song that they made that was very impactful to my life when I was young, right? So there are still those types of people in this world who revere these legendary figures, but culture moves on, time moves on, people forget the old legends, and you learn about them like it's a history class, which could be where they are. So the central conflict maybe is looking at, what happens when society no longer needs the mythological legends and things that basically form the value system of that society. Perhaps what these people did was they literally formed the value system of their society, right? Maybe even almost on a religious type of level at one point. And now it's just, that's not a necessity. So what could the protagonists of this story, of this type of idea, how are they directly butting up against these old heroes? Like maybe these protagonists are this new generation, or from this new generation that's rising up. They are maybe coming up in different types of, or they're expressing power, or rather influence, in ways that are different than the influence that these heroes, the mythological or the legendary heroes, wielded, right? So they're influential, but they don't need to be super powered, amazing, chosen one type of fantasy heroes. These are just regular people, and there's maybe more of them. Maybe society, this new generation is now coming up like, hey, let's band together and let's create a different type of government, or just the mindset is changing, and these protagonists kind of represent that. Now, I'm putting this in a place because I'm kind of like, I'm not quite sure exactly how this would play out, right? I think it's also going to depend on the time period, initially when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about it as kind of almost being set in like a modern but fantasy setting, right? So then you would have things like publicists and social media and stuff like that. But if it's not that, then we'd have to find some other types of equivalents. I am not quite 100% sure exactly what the protagonists could be doing to come against whatever the antagonists are doing, which is, it could even be that part of what they want to do. And now I know this might start to seem like it's going away from what the asker or the writer wants to do a little bit, but I think that the end can bring it back around to not necessarily being a full-blown conflict, but do these heroes, in an effort to regain their status or their visibility in the world, do they create a kind of like a fake scenario, problem, war, or whatever? And are the protagonists kind of able to stop these things? Like maybe these mythical, I always call them mythical, these legendary heroes are doing little things that would set them up to be able to save the day, but these other protagonists come in and by whatever means are now available, they stop these fake scenarios, right? Without having to be super powered or anything like that. And then perhaps it escalates to, well, now the stakes are higher because the heroes are kind of like, the legendary heroes are kind of like losing their grip a little bit, because it's like, okay, it starts to become more dire. And I don't know if it would escalate to the level of like a war against, between nations that they have to come in and stop, or resurrecting like the very demon dragon that they killed. Then that could be very interesting. Like the thing that put them on the map, maybe they bring it back in order to kill it again. And then maybe they can't. Maybe it's a contest of sorts, between them. So it's not necessarily like the protagonists are directly fighting the heroes, but maybe the heroes, after having been in these little skirmishes with the protagonists throughout the story, suggest one final like contest kind of. And maybe it is that they resurrect this demon dragon and who's going to defeat it, right? And then the protagonist could end up defeating it in a way that, again, doesn't require, these heroic sort of qualities. And that could even set up its own kind of question where it's like, okay, in the effort to kind of represent something different than these legendary heroes, in an effort to stop what they're doing and continue society in a direction that doesn't need heroes, do these people kind of become these protagonists kind of become heroes themselves? Or is it like the whole city, the whole wherever this is taking place, actually bands together and defeats the demon dragon and not the heroes, the legendary heroes? So it's like, it's a final thing of society no longer needs these legendary figures that have dominated the imagination and the societal morality and all that kind of stuff for all of these years. I am going to stop there. What I'm really trying to say is, perhaps it's more of the antagonists against the tide of culture, and the protagonists can represent this changing tide of culture. And it's not about an overthrow of a government or a regime, but it's about just the flow of life, right? And the next flow, the next, wave of whatever, society, of culture or whatever, is moving away from that old way that needed heroes, and we're moving into something new. And what that ultimately is remains to be seen, but it can become clear that it's no longer, there's no longer a place for these types of heroes for now. And then as culture and the world and society and time and history does, there could be a slingshot. Once it goes so far in that direction, eventually there is something that happens that would require something from that old time that we thought we were more advanced in. So eventually there would probably be a new crop of legendary heroes that come up, because we're always kind of slingshotting and rubber banding and pendulum swinging between extremes in society, right? So I wish I had been able to be that succinct as I was just now, but I had to work through it in my mind. I had to piece it together. As I said in the beginning, we are working through this idea together, but that's kind of where I am. It's the antagonist against the flow of culture, and the protagonists represent this flow of culture. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. What are your ideas? Something totally different, perhaps, or perhaps a better clarification on what I said here in this video, or a better way of explaining it that my, sleepy brain perhaps could not explain very well. But thank you for being with me today. Thank you for bearing with me. Enjoy your weekend. Okay? Enjoy your weekend. Take care of yourself and your family and those you love. Okay? And if you don't have anybody that you love, well, love yourself, and you give yourself all that love that you would give somebody else. And listen, I'll see you next time.